Hello, and welcome to Language Objectives Made Easy. My name is Leslie Zaroya, and I'm a Reading Language Arts consultant at LA County Office of Education. Let's start with the why. Why do we need to concern ourselves with language objectives? The answer is actually simple. It's an equity and access issue for English learners. Simply put, they need opportunities to be exposed to, practice with, and then be assessed on their language skills. If no language skill is identified in the lesson, then this becomes a missed opportunity for second language learners. Take a moment to look at this graphic and consider how it might relate to English learners. Feel free to stop and discuss. I love this graphic because it so aptly exemplifies the concept of equality versus equity. In the first graphic, equal supports are offered, demonstrating that students are treated equally. In the second image, each student gets customized supports that allows for equal access. Seems like problem solved, right? What is new is the third image. In this graphic, the systemic barrier was addressed, which removed the source of the inequality. This is how I see language objectives. They are one way to remove the barriers to learning. A teacher at one of my trainings said, "It's like we need to be gate openers, not gatekeepers." I love that. So let's talk about the purpose of a language objective. Essentially, it is to set the academic language function and skill that the learner needs in order to fully participate in the lesson. And while all learners can benefit from the clarity that comes from a teacher explicitly stating the academic language that needs to be mastered in the lesson, the true purpose is to make that pathway into the content accessible for English learners. It's also related to part 2 of the ELD standards and looking at how English works. Language objectives help us to break down how it works in the context of the content we are addressing. Let's take a moment and see what one teacher has to say about language objectives.
Having my content and language objectives posted and having them side by side, I think, is really helpful for me as a teacher because it keeps me focused on what we're sticking to, and it's easy to get lost on other things. Also, when I have other people in my classroom, then it helps them know what's going on. So instructional assistant, student teacher, parent volunteers, I can say, look right here, you'll see what we're doing. And then I go over them with my kids. I try to write them up while the students are watching, and when I change things, have the students watch so it's not just something that already happened to be hanging on the wall when they came in, and I think that helps so they know that they're an active living thing. But then also referring to them during the lesson points students to where can they look if they're not sure, for example, how to write something or how to say something. And I know that it's effective when students are showing each other. For example, we were talking in math yesterday about how many corners something has a skewness, and so someone was writing a skewness with the incorrect spelling, and one of their table mates showed them, oh, it's over here, and they went to the language objective because that's where I had it posted and where I had referenced it at the beginning of the lesson. I think also having them know that there's a language expectation, even not necessarily because obviously all of them can't read, but knowing that there's a language support and a language expectation pushes them to perform a little bit more and try.
I think Amy does a great job of summarizing why language objectives are so important to her instruction. Now let's get into how to write effective language objectives. The first thing to consider is the linguistic demand of the task. Look carefully at the syntax, style, and language in the text and/or task, and extract the logical connection. In a poem, look at rhyme, figurative language, or tone. In a science article, look for cause and effect or sequencing features. In math, check the procedural elements. In whatever kind of genre or activity, the question always goes back to what language forms or structures will be difficult for second language learners. It's also about looking at high leverage language that students will be able to apply in other contexts. The focus in traditional SEDI classrooms has been on vocabulary. And while vocabulary development is certainly a piece of the instructional process, too much emphasis on low-leverage words is a time waster. It's more important to look at words students need to know for conceptual development and, again, to use in other contexts. Another thing to remember is that a good language objective should always include active verbs. To say students will understand or students will appreciate does not convey active, measurable, efficient, or specific enough goals. The verb should lead to observable products and outcomes. More on that in a minute. Specifying the target language necessary is crucial. Again, it's asking what language is required to complete the task. If the task is to write a summary of an informational article, then what words and structures would an English learner need to do that? The objective should promote speaking, writing, and listening, the expressive skills that English learners need to be practicing daily. And finally, it should be measurable so that the teacher can know if students attained the stated goal and what steps to take next in instruction. Here's a basic frame for writing language objectives, courtesy of our friend and noted EL guru, Kate Kinsella. I like Kate's approach because it scaffolds the process for the teacher and gives little training wheels to get us going. So it begins with students will, then insert an active verb, then tell using what language. Students will do what? Describe a character's emotion. Using what? Precise adjectives. And another, students will do what? Revise a paragraph. Using what? Correct present tense and conditional verbs. It can also be flipped to say students will use blank, this language, to do what? Active verb. Now don't freak out because in this example, the language target is very grammar-based. Content teachers sometimes get scared by the precision of this and think, I have no idea how to come up with a grammar target. Don't worry, let's look at a few examples. So here, the content objective is that students will compare and contrast the physical adaptations that whales and sharks have that aid in their survival. So then we think, okay, what language does an English learner need to be able to do this? So the language objective is students will do what? Write a compare and contrast paragraph using what language? Using vocabulary associated with the function of compare and contrast, like similarly, in contrast, likewise, etc., after completing a Venn diagram with a partner. So the language objective both supports the content objective and gives the learner that apprenticing in how English actually works. This objective can also be assessed. Students could highlight the appropriate use of targeted compare and contrast words in their paragraph, and the teacher could easily determine if students understood how to use them and make any instructional adjustments. Here's another example. The content objective is that students will articulate how the goals of a political party are communicated by analyzing and then producing a campaign poster for a political candidate. So we would ask ourselves, what language do students need to be able to do this? First, they would need to know how to describe the goals of a political party before they can analyze how the goals are represented in a poster, right? So the language objective might be something like this. Students will describe the goals of a political party using the sentence frames, a party platform includes, the stance of a political party reveals, and elements included in campaign posters often include, etc., etc. Let's look at a math objective. Here, the content objective is for students to solve a word problem by determining the area of triangles using the formula area equals half the base times the height. The language objective is students will write, active verb, each step of solving the problem using what language? Using both sequence words like first, second, and next, and content words, base, height, and area, and read to a partner for feedback. Think about all of the language practice going on here. Students are getting solid content and also learning the language of that content and how it works. It just makes so much more sense. Here's one last example in social studies. The content objective is that students will analyze the roles and responsibilities in the three branches of government by comparing and contrasting the three branches and writing a summary. Yikes! There's a lot going on with this one. Analyzing, comparing, contrasting, and summarizing. So what might an English learner need in order to do all of this? Here's the language objective. Students will complete a T-chart and highlight similarities in yellow and differences in blue. They will explain how the three branches are similar and different using complex sentences and signal words such as one similarity or difference between blank and blank branch is, etc. Okay, so this one is a bit different from the others. It's more involved and there are multiple skills going on, but you can see that the goal is to identify the discrete language skills needed to complete the task. Just quickly, I want to return to the idea of active verbs. The verbs on the left are vague and difficult to measure. How do you know if a student appreciates or realizes something? The key is to use verbs that propel students to use language in a productive and measurable way. One other side note, this time on the idea of scaffolds. Traditionally, we have scaffolded and honestly sometimes over-scaffolded to the point where there's not much for students to actually figure out. We sometimes used adapted text or simplified versions of text in order to make it easier for language learners. We became so worried that students couldn't get through the more difficult texts that we processed and chewed the content for them. And while well-intentioned, this does not provide equal access to rigorous text. So now, both Common Core State Standards and Integrated ELD require that students have challenging texts and tasks with high levels of DOK. Scaffolds in this context are meant to provide access points for students. They are not meant to make the work easier, but rather attainable. Students are still asked to complete high-level activities using rigorous text, not adapted text or text that teachers over-explain and then have students repeat back. I think our intention was well-meaning in doing this. We were concerned that our English learners would not be able to be successful. But if we are anticipating the areas that will be challenging and provide the tools with which students can access the material, they can be successful. It's really about being very clear in what the language demands are and how to address them. So let's troubleshoot a bit. Read the content and language objective. What's wrong here? How can these line up better? You may want to stop here and take a minute to work through this. Okay, so if the content objective is to analyze metaphors in a free verse poem and write their own poem using 2 metaphors, they are clearly going to need to know the language of metaphors and the structure of free verse. So instead of just having students read their poem, which is not a bad activity per se, it's also not an objective. A better fit would be something like this. Students will analyze metaphors using the language. The first, second, next metaphor is comparing blank to blank, creating a tone, image, feeling, emotional response of blank. Another piece might include students will write their own metaphors and use the same structure to explain the effect on their own poem. So again, it's more about creating that pathway to the content through a very specific language target. Just reading a poem to another person is using language, but it is not instructing in how language is used. See the difference? Okay, last one. What might be missing here? Take a moment to sort this one out. I love this one because the idea of drawing the best argument is rather silly, but oh so common. Don't get me wrong, drawing can be a great way to communicate ideas, but in this case, it does nothing to create a pathway for an English learner to actually participate in a debate. How about this? Students will prepare debate notes using the following frames. The first major point I'd like to offer is, as evidenced by. Next, I'd like to add that because of. I'd like to counter the point that blank due to blank, and so on. This objective is much more specific and concrete in providing the specific scaffold needed to successfully engage in academic discourse in a meaningful way. Before we finish up here, I'd like to show a quick video clip. This is actually a kindergarten lesson on fact and opinion. Now, if you're a secondary person, you are already tempted to check out. But trust me here, the teacher does an amazing job of teaching the language objective, and her process is applicable at any grade level. And if she can accomplish this with kinder, the rest of us have no excuse. Take a look and watch for how the teacher supports the language objective with a variety of scaffolds.
So this morning, we're going to be working on facts and opinions.
My name is Elizabeth Ivashevich. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Lafayette Elementary, San Francisco Unified School District.
Let me think. Fact or opinion?
Do you think it's a fact or opinion?
So today in my class, we're going to be learning the difference between fact and opinion and tying that into our social studies unit, which is about American symbols.
Face your partner. Oh, now it's his turn.
San Francisco Unified encourages their teachers to utilize 5 essential practices when planning their ELD instruction time for their students. My integrated ELD time is really focused on academic conversation, really developing that academic discourse and rigor with my kindergartners. So it's done through structured questions, sentence starters, and partner work.
Do you think it's a fact or a opinion? I think it's a fact. What makes you say that?
Good job. Since there are so many ELLs in my room, I strategically pair them up with English speakers so that they're always getting that support that they need, not only from the classroom teacher, but from their peers as well.
I like the color pink. Raise your hand. Do you think that's a fact or an opinion? Lena, why do you think that's an opinion? Can that change or will that not change?
That can change.
That can change. Tomorrow I may like purple.
The goal of my integrated ELD lesson was really to reinforce what's a fact and what's an opinion. The reason I did that is because in their next lesson, I wanted to make sure when they were creating their own poster charts, they weren't putting down opinions, but they were writing facts on that chart.
Before we work with our partners, what do we have to remember how to do?
Ears are listening. Brain is thinking.
We start always our lessons with reviewing the norms of the listening skills, the talk moves, just to refresh their memories.
Keep the conversation going.
Good job, girls and boys. All right, this morning, I'm going to show one of these examples myself. When I say, this flower is pretty, partner A is going to say, do you think it's a fact or opinion? Partner B is going to say, let me think. I think this is an opinion. Partner A is going to say, what makes you say that? And partner B is going to say, I know, and I'm going to look over here, I know that an opinion is a thought or a feeling, and I know that opinions can change. I use those language supports in order for them to really, if they blank and they don't know what to say, they can always refer to the chart. How about Wen and Kana? Do you want to come up and show us how to do one?
Having an academic conversation in kindergarten is hard work, but by breaking it down and giving them the tools, they're able to do it. So it's been very rewarding.
Wenna, why don't you be partner A?
Do you think it's a fact or opinion? I think it's a fact. What makes you say that? I know that I know that opinions are thoughts or feelings, and I know that opinions don't change.
So Wenna, what did Wenna say?
Wenna said, do you think it's a fact or opinion?
So the Washington Memorial is located in Washington, D.C. Let's look at our chart again. Let's look at our chart, Kana. Can we observe that? Can we find it in a book? What do you think?
It's a fact.
So tell her again.
I think it's a fact.
Why?
And I know that facts can be observed
Look at your chart.
and be in a book.
That's good. So now you're going to be partner A this time. So today we're moving toward 80% student talk, 20% teacher talk. So a lot of the time I'm really not speaking in the classroom. They're leading the class, they're doing investigations, and they're sharing with each other.
Ready for our first one?
Yeah.
Don't worry. Oh, here's my statement. I like the White House. Lights, camera, go.
Do you think it's a fact or opinion? I think it's an opinion because opinion can change. What makes you say that?
Can change. Fine.
And
All right.
it's
So
a
it's
thought
your turn to ask the question.
feeling.
I heard some really good sharing. I heard a few different answers. Do you remember what your partner said? Yes. Oh, here's the tricky part. Now you need to switch to your second set partner.
So in today's lesson, I use second set partners.
Use your rug partner's name this time.
They need to turn to their second set partner and tell the second set partner what their rug partner had just shared.
It's an opinion because it's a feeling and opinions can change. Adria said that it's an opinion because it's a feeling and she knows that opinions can change.
Bum, ba-da-dum, bum. Last one, I have nothing written there. It's a surprise.
I always like to throw in a little curveball at the end of the lesson. It's an assessment piece, but also it's just kind of more of a deeper thinking piece.
This time with your rug partner, I want you to come up with one fact and one opinion. Do you remember who this was? Abraham Lincoln. Okay. One fact, one opinion.
That was hard for some students. And that's okay. You know, that's why I love teaching, because children make mistakes and that's how we learn.
Is that going to be a fact or
Opinion is a thought or a feeling. The president is on a $5
All right, let's go. Lights. Second set. Camera.
Adria said that it's an opinion because he doesn't move.
Fact versus opinion is really tough. And I noticed a lot of children today were looking at the chart and literally reading right off the chart and not processing what they were saying as carefully. And so for that reason, I really think that my next follow-up lesson has to be something that's even easier than a national symbol. It has to be something that's more personal to them.
I want to just go back really quickly and see which ones we got.
We use academic conversation throughout the whole day. We do it when we talk about feelings, when we talk about social studies, science. It's wonderful in solving problems and how you got to an answer.
Adria, why do you think this is an opinion?
Because it's thought.
Because it's a thought. It's something I'm feeling, right?
A lot of teachers would say that academic discourse is a middle school or high school topic. I would say start in kindergarten, start frequently, and start in small increments, little steps, baby steps.
Wasn't that teacher amazing? Feel free to take a moment and stop here to discuss these questions. What I love about this video, other than that the children are adorable, is that the teacher had a very clear target. She was teaching the language of fact and opinion. And because all of her kindergartners were not reading yet, she used both visual and written cues to present the concept of fact and opinion in the sentence frames. She also reflected on how the students did and immediately knew she had to reteach on an easier topic. She saw that they were heavily reliant on the scaffold and had to keep looking back at the poster. They needed more practice to internalize what it really meant. So her intent was to adjust instruction and give them more opportunities to build on what they had started in this lesson. Such a great instructional cycle, all driven by the language objective. So now there's an opportunity for you to practice with real text. Attached to this module are 4 different content readings. Choose one and work in groups to create content and language objectives. Be sure to share your objectives and make any needed adjustments. Now it's time to apply your learning to your own curriculum. Take a look at the next lesson you'll be teaching and write content and language objectives. Share your ideas with a partner for feedback. Then, after you actually teach the lesson, take a moment to reflect on the questions listed here. This step is really crucial. It allows you to know if that bit of extra planning paid off and why it did or did not, so adjustments can be made. So back to this graphic. You can see that the goal is the same for all students: experience with and completion of high-level, rigorous tasks. And with language objectives leading the instructional pathway, the systemic barrier of language demand is addressed. Before we go, I want to end with this quote from Chapter 2 of the ELA-ELD framework. I think it gives us a different lens with which to approach supporting English learners. It is important to position all students, particularly culturally and linguistically diverse learners, as competent and capable of achieving academic literacy. It is especially important to provide all learners an intellectually challenging curriculum with appropriate levels of support designed for apprenticing them to use disciplinary language successfully. The idea of an apprentice to the language is intriguing. Notice it doesn't say exposure to language, it says apprenticing them to disciplinary language. When you are an apprentice, you work side by side with someone, learning the tricks and tools of the trade. It's a great way to think about English learners in our content classrooms. The teacher's role is to apprentice them in the language that makes up that discipline. And the first step to doing that is considering the language demands of the task and writing language objectives that guide the work. Here are a few other resources for language objectives. Feel free to contact myself or Ruth Baskett, the project director for the English Learner Unit at LACO, for more information on topics and issues related to English learners. I've also included the link to my other modules, including one on intentional planning for English learners. Feel free to check these out. That brings us to the end. Thanks so much for taking part in this module, and good luck writing awesome language objectives.